Welcome to the Doc Style Reps podcast, where we talk with medical device sales reps about how they got started, how to support docs, and tales from the OR. If you're interested in asking a question on the show, please email info@docstyle.com.
Welcome to the Doc Style Podcast. I'm your host, Nate Darling. We're here today with Julia Greenspan, a super experienced device professional with Stryker. Now, Julia serves as the West Area Education Specialist, T&E, as a senior orthopedic trauma consultant. Julia, it is great to have you on the show. We're excited to learn about what it's like in the real world OR from the perspective of a female in the device industry.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So let's start at the beginning. Why did you get into medical?
I was super lucky. I was, right place, right time, right attitude. That's kind of my favorite way to put it. So I started in high school, there was a program that we had for students who wanted, and there was an RN running the program. I was super lucky to have that in Woodland, California. And I quickly learned that most kids were using it to ditch school. So I was one of the few. Very interested. I wanted to go to medical school, and I was going to be on my own dime. And so I didn't want to, go through all the time and energy and expense if I couldn't handle it. And so I looked into the program, and it turned out I was the only one who actually cared about where I was placed. And so the operating room was actually an option. So I started in sterile processing at 15. And I was very, very lucky. I had some people there who were really rooting for me. And so instead of staying the 2 hours that I was required, I wound up quickly seeing that, if I just stayed an extra 4 or whatever, I became quickly sort of one of the staff there. And then I got hired on. And while I went through college, I stayed there as a surgical technologist. And then I just graduated UC Davis, and I got approached by Synthes Trauma. I just finished a tibia nail, and the rep was asking me, "Hey, do you have a degree?" And I said, "Yeah, I just got it, kind of starting to look into med school." And he said, "Well, if you ever want to think about a job in medical device," and I still remember looking at him, Brian Murray, amazing guy, and saying, "I don't know what you do. You're like a magical creature who comes in here, tells me what to do, and then you leave. But beyond that, I have no clue." And so he kind of giggled and said, "Whatever, give it a shot." And so I kind of went down the rabbit hole, and I wound up getting a position with Synthes Trauma in Oakland under the godfather of Synthes Trauma in the Bay Area. So I got really lucky. His name is Jay Wisner. He's a legend. I love him. He's like my second dad. And so I worked, for Synthes for almost a decade, and then went back to surgical technology for a couple of years, and then to Stryker. So pretty crazy, right place, right time sort of situation for me.
Surgical technicians assist surgeons and other medical professionals in hospital operating rooms and similar environments. Chiefly, they prepare patients, rooms, and equipment for pending surgical procedures. They also assist during those procedures as part of a team of operating room professionals. Many successful medical device reps started out as surgical technologists.
Absolutely. So that's how you did it. But what was the motivating factor behind it to begin with? Why did you want to get into medical? You'd mentioned going to medical school, maybe. What was the drive behind all of that?
At that time, I had friends that were also applying for medical school or looking into it, and the expense is pretty intense. So I even have a friend now, she's out, she's finished her OBGYN residency, and she's got $450,000 in debt. And so I was looking at medical device, and after I started interviewing with Synthes and met Jay, I was like, wait a minute, let me get this straight. So I can continually learn for the rest of my career. I get paid to go to industry meetings. I get paid to see lectures. I will get to specialize in a field. And then I'm like, I don't have to pay for it. I was pretty gobsmacked when I realized, the opportunity that was in front of me. And so I figured if I don't like it, I can always go back to school. And if I do like it, then I've made probably one of the best financial decisions while still getting sort of the satisfaction of getting to specialize in a really interesting field, because ortho was always my first love. and specifically ortho trauma. So it was a pretty perfect fit. I couldn't pass it up. And it's proved very correct for my personality. I really, the constant learning part of it has not failed me.
Now, you mentioned you got your first opportunity out of school in Oakland. What was that initial experience like for you?
Yeah, I think I was very fortunate that since I grew up in the OR, because by the time I got there at 24, I'd already been in the operating room for 7 years. I knew the culture. And I think when new reps come in, it can be really difficult because they don't understand the culture of the OR. And so for me, that was not so much of a leap. I'll tell you, the hardest thing was not scrubbing in. Anyone who has been part of the team or has ever been a surgical technologist, and all of a sudden being told, don't touch anything blue, and did you sign in, is incredibly hard. Because you realize, okay, that's now outside my scope of practice. And that adjustment for me was difficult. And it's still difficult. I still miss it. So I go on medical missions to make up for it. It's hard.
Nice. An orthopedic trauma sales representative is primarily responsible for providing technical advice to customers to help achieve the sales objectives in assigned geography. As a trauma sales representative, you work with a high degree of intensity and commitment to sell orthopedic trauma products that meet the need of the orthopedic trauma surgeon.
So in that first opportunity, what did you learn?
Man, so much. I think, and even surgical techs that I talk to now and nurses that I talk to now, I think that they don't quite realize just how much goes into making a case go well. You have to be incredibly detail-oriented to be successful, and you have to truly care about your patient, your surgeon, and your staff and how the case goes. And in order to make that happen, sometimes there are great efforts taken. So, for instance, if a surgeon called me when I was a Synthes and they'd say, hey, I need a volar rim plate. Well, at the time, that was a very, sort of niche plate that wasn't really common in our area. I would just say, sure, I'll have it there tomorrow. And what that meant was I was saying, sure, dropping the phone, texting a million people, trying to find the plate, driving to Sacramento, which was, a 2-hour schlep, getting the plate, driving it to the hospital. It's this whole back end process that I can either tell the surgeon, yes, I'm going to have it, or no, I can't get it. But if I can, I'm not going to worry them with logistics. It's my job to worry about the logistics and warn the hospital of my ETA and all of that. And back when I was a surgical tech, I didn't know. I would go to my case cart and see that the loaners were there or not there.
Right.
Not, how did it get here? Is the tray full? All those other questions, all of a sudden were my responsibility. And so that was a huge, huge learning experience for me.
Now, how did the experiences in that first job help you get to the next step?
Well, Synthes in the heyday was, a renowned way to learn how to do trauma. The associateships were 2 years. I was under an incredibly senior person, so I got really fortunate in my position in that I had a really traditional, very thorough training. So there was no hazing. There was no, I was in the OR 24/7, of course, but, sometimes there are horror stories of associates at some companies or in some situations, like, wash my car. I never had that. I had a very respectful senior who truly cared about my educational experience and growing sort of my respect and my career. So I got lucky there. But I think that ultimately it was really proving to myself that I had it in me to do. And that my senior gave me the freedom to learn that about myself. Because I think when you get in as a young associate, sometimes you wonder, geez, can I do this? This is a pretty adult job. This is a lot. And can I learn everything that I need to learn? Can I do everything that I need to do? Can I, sort of foster my independence while keeping my patients safe? There's a lot that goes into those first couple of years. But if you're set up correctly, I think that really enriches your career in a way that few other situations can. So that first job was paramount, but it's also because I stuck it out. I think to have that first experience, you need to be at your first company for, as long as it's the right situation, at least 5 years. And I think that is what made me a great rep, was I had the time to get comfortable, to fully season. And that for me was really, that was probably the best move I ever made, was to really commit for almost a decade and really get that, that full experience.
The Associate Sales Representative, ASR, actively assists more senior sales representatives in their day-to-day activities servicing surgeons and surgical facilities. The ASR covers cases, daily deliveries and returns, inventory to and from surgical facilities, and conducts sales activities at the direction of the more senior representatives in the territory. Many device reps start as associates, and it can be helpful to almost think of it as an apprenticeship. Usually an individual stays in this role for a minimum of 1 to 2 years.
Now, how did those experiences shape your view on device sales?
I'd say it's a mixed bag, especially coming from someone in the operating room on the other side of the table, right? So I think I got very frustrated when orthopedic trauma sales was mixed in with other divisions, like pharma. Like, it's wildly different. We have a totally different call schedule that's 24/7, incredibly demanding. I didn't do as many door-to-door cold sales calls as some other divisions either. And I think for me, I felt very proud of being in trauma. That was a badge that we wore as a resource, not just a rep. And so, for me, I think that was probably one of the deciding factors to stay in trauma, because it had a really clear ethical path for myself. I'd never been like a car salesman type, use my stuff. I can't do that. I would see that sometimes and kind of cringe. And it's not to say that it's not a method. It's definitely some people's style, and they have personality, and it actually works. They get in front of people and they wind up being great. But for me, I really had to come from the education standpoint of teach me everything. I want to know everything. Help me, help you get there, because I was managing residents. So I needed to help them on their path as well. And for me, I didn't know that side of it when I was being a surgical tech. I was just scrubbing in, and the rep was telling me what to do. I had no concept of the depth of their knowledge. And I gained a lot of respect for medical device after I became a rep, because there's just so much that we have to deal with, and so much that we know that has to be behind the scenes in order for it to function. And so you don't know what you don't know. And so I have high respect for medical device, particularly trauma, spine, CMF, in sports. It's a tough gig.
Now, historically speaking, medical device sales tend to be male dominated. Now, do you see that changing at all?
Tough question. I would like to say yes. I think there's more awareness. I can say that for sure. There is definitely more awareness with the need for diversity in medical device, particularly females. I don't necessarily see it changing as quickly as I'd like it to, but that's not necessarily a function of the companies, I don't think. I think some of that is a function of the job itself. But you're asking someone who does trauma, and anyone who's in trauma will tell you it's probably the most unforgiving schedule. So if you're a woman, I had a pregnancy while at Synthes Trauma, and that is it's almost unheard of to have a pregnant female trauma rep and someone who actually comes back to the job. Very, very, very rare. I remember emailing the country trying to find all the female trauma reps, and I think I found 13 just to get their experiences of a pregnancy. Only 2 of them had a pregnancy, and only 1 of them had stayed in trauma. So that's pretty bad if that's the entire country. And I'm like, please, is there another woman I can talk to about this? So, because of that demanding schedule, I think that sometimes there is, either it's a lack of interest or a lack of sort of the social support to, be able to have this job. Like, I have to have a stay-at-home husband in order to have this job. And that's pretty rare these days. And so until I think that, a woman gets supported in all aspects to be able to have that pager on, the retention's not going to be high. But that's not necessarily the fault of the company. That's a function of the job.
Did you know that Stryker created the Stryker Women's Network? The SWN is committed to encouraging a more inclusive work environment and providing a forum that offers women new opportunities to grow as professionals, leaders, and individuals. SWN initiatives include a sales subcommittee that is dedicated to attracting, developing, and retaining women in the sales force, and a mentorship subcommittee which is focused on enriching mentorship programs across Stryker. Currently, there are over 1,500 plus members across the globe. Way to go, Stryker!
Right. Now, I'm sort of expounding on that because you are one of the few women who've had that experience. Do you feel a sense of responsibility to be a leader for women who are coming along behind you in that aspect?
Oh, 110%. Yes. I actually often get pinged, especially from, colleagues who may have a female rep in their branch, sometimes as far flung as New York. I've gotten contacted from other countries of female trauma reps who are looking for some support. And that's pretty impressive if I think that we're having to reach that far to get not just advice, but seasoned advice. And that's, I think, the difference is they're looking for someone who's been doing this long enough to actually offer a seasoned outlook on, hey, here's your situation, here's my advice, or here's how I feel about that. Stryker completely lost their mind, and they decided I should be part of the Stryker Women's Network, which is really cool. I didn't really know that we had something like that until recently. And so they decided I'd be the West area sort of lead for that initiative, which I think is great. But it's also, again, how do we make trauma more accessible to females? And that's going to be something that we look at over the next, 5 years, I'm sure.
Now, what is it like being a female in an industry that's historically had a lot more male reps than female?
It's different. And I've had to coach the male managers about, hey, you might have to coach your female associates and your female reps a little bit differently. In that I think we have to come from a different place where some male reps, they may be able to get away with a little bit more socializing or kind of buddy-buddy, sort of persona with their surgeons when they first start. I think for me and for most females, we feel, to be successful, you really have to lead with your knowledge. And it's not necessarily fair, but I think it's a reality that we get judged. Everybody gets judged when they're first met. We're not special, but I think that females in particular, sometimes from hospital staff, sometimes from the surgeons themselves, it just becomes a slightly more, we're a little bit more under a microscope with, do you know your product knowledge? Are you going to be responsive? Because it's kind of, we have to lead with that. I think when you lead with any kind of sort of social, charisma, you have to be careful there to make sure it's not taken as an advance or, you don't want to be the ditzy girl. I remember when I very first got hired, one of my surgeons at my old hospital said, Jules, don't be the hot rep, be the smart rep. And it was a really weird thing for him to say to me at the time. I was very taken aback. But as soon as I got into the industry, I was like, oh, man, that's what he meant. And I think it's really critical. You have to get yourself in situations where they can see how much knowledge you have and let that lead so they trust you.
Now, how have companies helped facilitate the role that you have, or have they?
You mean as a female trauma rep, or a rep in general? Or?
Yeah,
I think that
basically what your experience is.
Yeah, I think that, management can sort of recommend whoever they think might be appropriate for a position. But at the end of the day, when it comes to entry level, like if this is, sort of a new person listening and they're a female and they're like, man, how do I break into that, or who facilitates that? I have to owe everything I have to my old senior, Jay Wisner. He was the one who green-lighted me and said, hey, she seems quick. Seems like she's got something. He was the one who believed in me. And I think it really takes that first person to say, hey, they have something special in there. And some companies have personality tests and strengths finders that they use to try to hone in on those personality qualities that might be successful. Like, there's different ways to go about it. But for me, at the end of the day, I think you have to have a personal champion. You have to have someone who's willing to mentor you and train you. But most companies now, I think they really try to look for ways to retain female reps. It's just a difficult task in trauma.
Sure. Now, in terms of medical facilities, have they helped facilitate the role for you, or not at all?
Not really. In some ways, but I think at the end of the day, it's not their concern. They don't really care if it's a female or a male. They want the set sterile. They want everything complete. They care about the logistics. Like, is my patient taken care of? Is my staff treated with respect? I will say that some of my surgeons actually wound up being some of my biggest champions during pregnancy, where I was fine. I was happy to go 16 hours. They'd be like, Jewel, sit down. No, I'm fine. What are you doing? Everything's okay. And they wound up really, sort of taking care of me. And in that way, I felt very protected and cared for by my surgeons, kind of actually caring whether my feet hurt. That was nice. Most people don't care. But as far as staff themselves, I kind of like to take gender out of it. I don't want them thinking about me as a female rep or a male rep. I want them to be like, oh man, our Stryker rep is awesome. As long as they see my jersey, I don't really want them being concerned about the politics of it.
Okay. Now, talking about your current role, what is it like working for Stryker?
Stryker is unexpected. I think coming in as a seasoned sort of, traditional Synthes rep, I was incredibly, I drank the Kool-Aid. I didn't like Stryker at first because I had spent a decade sort of working against them. And I had an interview and I met this incredible GM who just totally turned that around for me. It's like everybody I met surprised me, because they were exactly my type of person. It was so funny. Every time I ran into somebody, through the Stryker interview process, I was just constantly like, darn it, I don't want to like you that much. And I quickly found out, okay, this might be actually a really good move for me. This was after the J&J acquisition of Synthes, and I think that, it had, it wasn't really where I wanted to be anymore. And I think I definitely found a home. And I think it goes to show that I did, because I was shocked. They've really listened to me, and they've really made me feel supported, and, allowed me to start working into leadership, which, I was not expecting.
What does a Stryker trauma sales rep look like? Hard-working winners. You love driving in the fast lane and live out your mission to change lives by selling Stryker products that are making healthcare better. Mission-driven salespeople. You live your work, feeding off the extreme demands of trauma, not counting hours, but rather lives impacted. Energetic achievers. Upbeat associates who love being busy and never hesitate to help a customer or team member when needed.
So that's the good. What if any, are the bad aspects about the company that you're with now, or things that might need to be tweaked?
I think that every company has things to work on. I think for me, it's just a process of the medical industry as a whole. I think every single company is working on leaning out their business, and reps don't like that all the time. But that's every company. I've never really seen it as a company specific issue. I think that the more that, reimbursements go down for hospitals and we start to see, tougher and tougher contract negotiations, that all trickles down. So I don't think there's any specific negatives. I'm actually at the home office this week. And so you're getting me on a very sunny, positive day because I went into our medical library, which we actually have a physical medical library, which I don't think anybody has one anymore. And I saw journals, the Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery from 1959 sitting on the shelf, and I'm in heaven. So right now, I don't know. I don't think we face any more negatives than any other company. It's all good right now. You're getting me on the day where I got to see that. So
well, that's
happy.
That's fantastic. So this is a special day, but let's talk about what a day-to-day is like in your current role.
Yeah. So my current role is interesting. So, I just transitioned into it. Specifically from the trauma rep side. So as a trauma rep, it's a little bit different, right? Because that's just, your phone is constantly on 24/7, running and gunning. Even your text alerts are on a ringtone, because everybody texts now, including surgeons who are letting you know about urgent, emergent cases. And so that's, you're always on call. And I'm still on call because I'm still kind of connected to my old territory. But it is nicer now that I actually have a team in place. So if something comes up, I'm allowed to, if I'm dealing with an education issue, I can now sort of ping my team and they will take care of the emergent case. So that's that's sort of new for me, sort of being in more of a position, a level up, being able to delegate. But that's also a function of having, people who are competent. So I love my team. They're amazing. But usually I'm up early. I am talking to the East Coast a lot, and they're 3 hours ahead. So usually up by 6 at least, usually already, going. And then dealing with, a lot of logistics for education on one side, and then case logistics on the other. So it's kind of a bizarre hybrid role. But I love it. So trauma is you have no outline. You have no day to day. It is, you wake up, you see what happens. You might have kind of a skeleton sort of backbone idea of what your day looks like. Whether it's responding to case coverage, case logistics that need to be handled, or, calls that I have as far as education goes, or meetings. And then whatever happens, it could change the entire day. So you have to stay really flexible.
Now, what is the most challenging part of the current role that you have?
I think for me, it is, kind of getting people to drink the Kool-Aid about just how important medical education is. I'm technically, handling some of the educational duties for 10 states, and that's a big patch of dirt to be covering. And I'm a true believer in just how impactful we are as an industry to connect people. So connecting medical residents to attendings outside of their residency, I think is really important. Getting them different ideas, getting them to the right meetings, helping them get different skills down that they might not be able to get at their current residency program. And that's just for me, like my ultimate mission is to get education in every spot that I can cover. But it's hard. It takes work.
Absolutely. 10 states. Absolutely. So that being said, what's next for you?
Oh man. Well, I just started in this new role. So that is going to probably keep me busy, for the next couple of years at least. I tend to like to hunker down and, especially when I have a big project, I really want to, work on it as much as I can and perfect it. It usually takes me at least a few years to do that. So I see myself in this role for at least the next couple of years, and I'm happy to do that. Ultimately, if going into leadership was something that, they were looking at for me, then I'd have to really think about that. I love staying connected to the field, but I'll worry about that when it comes. For now, I'll just, try to stay above water. It's always a challenge.
So let's sort of turn our focus a little bit for a moment. What do you think is the key to being a good rep?
Oh, how to be a good rep. That is like the holy grail question. Yeah. I think it's a constellation of factors, and ultimately it's going to be different for some people than others. Everyone has different skill sets that they can capitalize on. I think staying in your strengths and playing to your strengths is a really big one. As long as you kind of work on the things that you need to improve on. So maybe if you hate public speaking, like work on that quietly, like always be looking to improve yourself. But if you're a great public speaker, then recognize that and use that and get out there and talk to people and, give morning in services and give lectures, like play to those strengths and hone those skills. You should always be looking for improvement. Be 100% thinking about what the other person is stressing on. We did this workshop a long time ago. And one of the favorite things that I took away from that workshop was people's pressure sheets. Like in any conversation, whether it's a negotiation or whether it's just an interaction with staff or your surgeon or the guy at FedEx, whatever, be thinking of the other person's pressure sheet. What are they thinking about? What are they stressing about? Is it money? Is it family? Are they, not aware of this case? Are they not educated enough about it? And how that could be impacting their reactions and what you can do to neutralize it. That's been really big for me. I think always thinking of the other person's position, and that's kept it from being a reactionary position for me, because I think a lot of reps, especially when they're young, if they're not treated well at a hospital, because sometimes we're treated as, the outsider, can take it personally and say, oh man, that lady was really mean to me at the front desk. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of part of the job, but also keep in mind her pressure sheet. Don't take it personally. Maybe she's having a terrible day. Like, it's not about you. That will keep you steady and able to perform at your highest level and not kind of dive into the gossip and dive into the dark side. Because it's not going to help you. It's just going to make your day worse. It'll also keep you focused on the case. Like, I can't stress enough, focus on the case. Like, if you're a new rep and let's say you have like a tibial plateau the next day, focus on the case the day before. Do you have the equipment? Don't trust other people to take the equipment to the hospital. If you do, have them take pictures. Be ultimately paranoid about everything that's going into that case and triple check everything. Study your technique guide. Study the clinical side. Do whatever you can. Soak up every bit of information. And then when you're in the case, stop. Put your phone down and focus. I can't tell you how many times, even as a surgical tech, that I had reps trying to learn on the fly. And it's hard in trauma because we don't always know about our cases. But oftentimes you have enough time to, pick someone's brain that who's been around longer than you, or be able to look up something in a journal or look at a textbook to get more information. But once you're in the room, you have to be in that room. If people see you on your phone, even if we're doing business, like maybe a trauma just came into another hospital and it's your team looking to communicate, that's a really tough situation. Maybe you can shoot off a quick text, but you have to put it down. And that's always a really hard moment for a rep, because everyone thinks you're on Facebook or something. It's like, no. I cover other hospitals and something really important happened. But, you have to see how that looks from the outside. So be focused and then follow up. I think it's always okay to talk to the surgeon later and say, hey, how was our tibial plateau from Monday? She okay? How's she doing? And show that you care about your patients, because ultimately, like, you're responsible for their hardware, and that is no small matter. And I think treating it with respect, acting interested, learning, constantly learning is the only way to stay really happy in the job. And you need that to be functional, because if you don't love it, you're going to want to leave it. It's too hard of a job not to love it.
One who gains strength by overcoming obstacles possesses the only strength which can overcome adversity.
Right. Now, when you're working, do you prefer service or product when you're selling?
Service.
Okay.
Yeah, service. I think that in orthopedic trauma and a lot of, sort of companies now, products are becoming slightly more commoditized. And, I know that luckily I have the fortune of being in the business a little bit longer. I would always like to prize my service above everything else. You're not going to necessarily use my distal fibular plate. Maybe it has something extra special, but, pick company X over company Y. But at the end of the day, you can have the best hardware on the planet. And if the service is awful, it doesn't matter. You're going to get screw racks that aren't full. Maybe the plate that you used on Monday has not been restocked because the service is bad, and so you don't have it on Wednesday. So it's kind of crazy. It's like the best service can still sell slightly, less awesome B-string equipment, but you can never have A-string equipment with horrible service. I would rather have my service absolutely down to a T. And be honest about my products. And I'm very lucky. I have a great bag. I don't have anything to complain about. But if there's a rep out there who's like, man, I just don't know how I feel about, this product that we carry. Well, be honest about that. If you're wondering, your surgeons are wondering, and have an honest conversation. And don't be afraid of that. I think that's what's so funny. Sometimes people are afraid of like, oh, well, he can't know that I secretly hate, whatever, our suture anger. It's like, he totally wants to have that conversation. Like, just have it. You'll learn something from it, if anything.
Now,
and that's being good service.
You might have the best quality product, but that only gets you into the game. Even if you have a great product, it's impossible to win without great service.
Yeah, and you probably covered a little bit of this in the key to being a good rep, but what do you think is the key to a long career in device sales?
Oh, it's getting harder and harder these days, isn't it? It's so demanding. But I really think you have to love your specialty. There's people who say, I want to get into medical device, right? And while medical device is all encompassing, every specialty you imagine, from OBGYN products to, neuro, biologics, everything. So you really have to find your specialty. I've had some people kind of trying to break into the business who will contact me and say, look, I'm just trying to break into medical device. It's like, no, you're thinking about this the wrong way. You're trying to break into what specialty? Like, what piques your interest? Because I know for a fact that if I went to go, I don't know, try to sell Da Vinci robots or something, for me, like for some people that is like the pinnacle and they're super excited, and I think that's amazing. For me, it's just never really been my bag when I was scrubbing, or even I got offered a position or, offered an interview opportunity for Da Vinci. And I was like, man, I'm just not a robot gal, but I know that about myself because I know that I wouldn't be as passionate about it as I am about orthopedic trauma. And the key is finding your niche, finding your people, finding the topics that are going to make you stay late, finding the topics that are going to have you like searching for white papers on Ovid. That is the key to the long career, and building your team. You have to love your team. You can weather a lot of storms if you have good people around you. And that for me was absolutely critical. I got very lucky in every situation I had to have amazing people around me.
Now, a lot of being in device sales is about relationships and building relationships. How do you engage with a new doctor?
That's a good question. Actually, one that I get a fair amount from sort of newer reps who are like, man, I'm just really trying to get in front of this guy. And, when I do, what do I say? And I think for me, honesty is the route. And that's with any relationship, be it personal or business. You're not going to go up to someone on the street and try to swindle them into hanging out with you. Like, no, how you doing? Like, what are you interested in? Like, what topics, did you study? Like, you want to actually be truly curious and interested in the person in front of you. And that doesn't change when it comes to sales. It's the same thing. And I think being 100% honest about your experience, is critical. And one of the ways that I think I was successful in forming relationships was recognizing particular surgeons who liked to teach and recognizing that they were sort of a kindred spirit. And, okay, I think I can ask them questions and just say, I am so curious. Okay, so I read this white paper the other day. I want to get your take on it. And having meaningful conversations. So it's not, an excuse to get products in front of them. It's not an excuse to have a conversation. I'm actually curious, and I'm truly looking to them as a resource. And then they would start to look to me as a resource, and it forms this symbiotic relationship between the two of you, where you are truly helping each other in your careers. And that is sort of like my idea of how to form a good relationship, because I don't want it to be product-based. I want that relationship to extend beyond product. Because if you do the right thing, the money will follow. That's what Jay Wisner always told me. And he's right. Just do the right thing. Don't worry about your quota right now. Especially if you're just starting out. Like, we all think about it and it's always there. But your surgeon should never see that stress on your face. Ever. That should never enter your relationship with your surgeon.
In medical device sales, it takes months, maybe years to work with a customer, and truly seconds to lose one.
Now, from a new relationship to existing relationships, how do you maintain those?
Well, new relationships are a little bit different, right? I'm a little more formal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little more, I'm a little more careful until I really know someone's personality, especially as a female in orthopedics. You have to be, we're a little more cautious. I'm not going to be like, maybe making some of the bluer jokes with people I don't know very well. And so it's just a more formal service, based, resource-based relationship. And with surgeons who I've known for a long time, then obviously it's more casual. We can relax. We can talk to each other. We can giggle. We can make fun of each other. And then get right down to business where we need to. Of course, and if it's in the case, I still have to, we pull that back during the case because you have to be focused on the case no matter what. But, I go on medical missions with some of my surgeons and, it's going to be a slightly different relationship. You've bonded, you've been on an adventure together and scrubbed in together. And so it's a little bit more casual, sort of just knocking around the hallways together versus a new surgeon.
So let's say, for instance, you are someone who is looking for a new company to work for. You transitioned from your old company to Stryker. How do you go about that?
Do you mean how do I get the interview, or what do I look for in a new company?
Let's say, how do you get the interview?
LinkedIn's awesome. I would say that LinkedIn is probably one of the greatest resources for people, including me. I've made a lot of really neat connections, through that pathway. And if there's someone who interests me, if I see a profile that I like, or maybe the work with a really great manager, I just usually reach out to the manager personally. I tend not to go through recruiters. It's fine if it's you have to really go from the outside. But I tend to look for the people that I would be working directly under, because that matters more to me than entire company culture. It's no. Who am I directly going to be under, and do I believe in them? And then from then, if they respond to you, it's almost okay, why should I work for you? You tell me why you're awesome and why I should come over. I think it's okay to have that mindset, because it's a big choice to move companies.
Why is LinkedIn important? LinkedIn allows you to access important articles and posts which are relevant to you through your daily feed. It helps you develop a strong digital footprint, which is essentially your personal brand. It helps you research companies and industries, find and apply for jobs, and build a strong professional network. If you are searching for a job in medical device sales, it is paramount to be on LinkedIn.
I think that's great advice, and something a lot of people might not have thought about. So in terms of relationships, how do you manage your relationships with hospitals?
Ooh, yeah. Hospitals are a totally different animal than your surgeon relationships. I do a ton of CEU, which are continuing education unit events. For my staff, I think that, you get from your staff what you put in. And, it's not something that's going to be, for the super salesy people out there. It's not like you're going to see immediate ROI from one educational event. But you're not trying to get that. That is, you're fostering a sense of goodwill. you're imparting knowledge, which is critical for some of these people. Surgical technologists in their current textbook, they don't actually go in depth at all into orthopedics. And so when you have these newer surgical techs and some of these newer RNs circulating, you know, you have to realize, like, nobody actually sat them down and explained some of the basics of ortho. So one of my least favorite moments is if I hear a competitive rep or someone around me kind of, oh, that surgical tech was terrible, or like, oh, she didn't know what she was doing. It's like, well, wait a minute. Go be part of the solution. Grab a whiteboard, grab a pen, and talk to them. Like, we know so much and can impart so much knowledge that it only takes, you know, it's basically just hard work. It's just elbow grease to actually do a lab or to do a morning, you know, trauma talk or things like that. And for me, that's how I engage the best with staff, because I love teaching. And I think that having also been a surgical tech and, you know, sort of been one of the staff, I can speak to both sides of the table, which I think is sort of, you know, I think it's pretty critical when you're talking to those newer techs who might not know about things like C-armor or, you know, the little basics. And so, yeah, for me, that's, you know, that's been my greatest win. You know, give them 100% of your respect. And if you see an issue, you know, solution, not part of the problem. And that even goes with hostile people, because, you know, we've all experienced it. There's sometimes hostile people at the front desk or whatever. And again, go back to that pressure sheet. Like, we have no idea what they dealt with that day. Okay, how can I be part of your solution today? You just be thinking about that in your head. Like, what can I do to make this person's day better? And from there, you know, I've never really had a bad experience after that. Like, once I get in with the staff and they know that I'm actually there to try to make their day smoother, and treat them well and set them up for success, then, you know, it's usually actually a pretty fun day at work. So
now turning to distributor relationships, are those a little bit different? How do you handle those?
Well, we're direct for the most part. So luckily I don't have to, you know, like I'm not part of a distributorship. So do you mean with my competition or? No,
that's okay. If the question doesn't really apply, then that's fine. We can move ahead. So what would be the one piece of advice you'd give someone trying to break into the device sales industry? And I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier, so I'm curious about the one piece that you would say.
Focus. Know what you're going for and go after it. You know, don't take the first job that has an opening just to get experience. You know, sometimes you'll find yourself stuck at the wrong company for 5 years with that kind of attitude. And that's really hard for people to hear, because it's, you know, easy for you to say, like, you know, you've already found your job. Like, I totally get it. But, like, you're going to hate medical device if you don't focus on the passion that you have, or that topic that really, really gets you excited, just because you settle for something different. Like, oh, well, I really wanted orthopedic trauma, but I settled for, you know, whatever, OBGYN, you know, ablation products or something. And then all of a sudden, 5 years later, you're like, ugh, I really like medical device. You know, focus on what you want. You know, like initially, like learn everything you can about orthopedic trauma. Talk to orthopedic trauma reps. You know, if you need to, go to the hospital. Hang outside the waiting room. You'll see reps all the time. Like, talk to them. Hey, you mind if I ask you a question? This is super awkward. I know I just met you, but can I ask you a question about your job? You know, like, you can do that. And I think, to me, that's a little more effective to actually your eventual happiness, because, you know, you need to be happy. You're worth being happy. You know, just because you're new doesn't mean that you need to settle for something that you hate.
Now, what does the future look like for device sales as a whole? Do you see risk or do you see opportunity?
I see opportunity. You know, there's been some hospitals that have attempted to go repless, and I think it's been pretty quickly proven that we are absolutely critical to surgical sales. It's really important what we do, even if it's not always respected or not well understood. I think there's a lot of, like, education that needs to happen about what we actually do. And, you know, not all of us are making, like, you know, seven figures. Like, that's not the case. We're all, we work really hard and we have important jobs. I don't see medical device going down. I just see us adapting. And I think you're already seeing that. You're seeing robotics, happening in total joints and in spine. People are starting to adapt, to the new sort of billing practices where, it's definitely not going to be easy or fun. And there might be some, things that might tweak a little bit in the future, but I certainly don't see it going away. I certainly wouldn't want it to. I think it's a really important field.
Expect change. Analyze the landscape. Take the opportunities. Stop being the chess piece. Become the player. It's your move. Tony Robbins.
All right, so we've done all the heavy lifting. Now it's time for the speed round. These are just quick questions and answers to wrap it up. Do you consider your success related to luck or hard work?
Oof. I'll say hard work.
What career would you have chosen if not for device?
Definitely orthopedic trauma surgeon.
What is your favorite influencer, book, or speaker for the industry?
Oh, there's this really great book about, I guess maybe it's not completely connected. It's this great book about trauma stewardship. It's actually about how to manage your sort of emotions and stress while dealing with taking care of people in trauma.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite medical facility that you've supported?
Highland Hospital in Oakland, California, hands down.
Okay. And finally, what advice would you give someone trying to get into the industry?
Oh, definitely work hard. Work harder than anyone tells you you have to. Read constantly and keep your chin up.
All right. That'll do it. Julia Greenspan, thank you for joining us today on the Doc Style Podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Doc Style Reps Podcast. Stay tuned for more episodes each month featuring how to get started in medical sales and tales from the OR. If you have questions or topic suggestions for the show, please email info@docstyle.com. That's info@docstdial.com. Let us know what you think.